Good evening, everyone. I would like to begin this evening by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, the traditional owners of the land on which the Parkville campus stands, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and any Indigenous guests who are here tonight. We acknowledge and respect that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had and still have law that predates colonization. We, as built environment and design experts, share our responsibility to care for country and thank our traditional owners for sharing their knowledge. Before we start, I would also like to express my deepest sympathy for any individual, nation, or people who are victims of discrimination and violence, and as a result are removed from their families, displaced from their country, and I declare my support in their search for a safe and peaceful environment. Yes, thank you. Good evening, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Stefan Welch. I'm one of the organizers of Architects Declare. Housekeeping. Exits are sort of up there. I won't do the oxygen mask thing, so exits are up there and toilets straight out there to the right. So as I said, I'm one of the organizers of Architects Declare. Today we received a letter from the Australian Taxation Office, which can usually mean two things: you're either in trouble or matters are moving into the right direction. In this case, there's good news. Architects Declare as a movement is becoming a legal entity, which means that we will have more resources, we can attract funding, we'll have a better support network, and we can then obviously, and that will result in more effective climate action. And that's the reason why we're here tonight. So as architects, if you want it or not, we are right in the middle of climate action, and to fulfill our obligations as global citizens, we need a plan and a support mechanism to implement it. A group of architects internationally, mainly the US and the UK, have created a sustainability action plan template for architects. The SAP template helps you think through strategically and methodically how to translate 11 principles of the declaration into action. So ideally, every architectural practice in Australia should have a sustainability action plan. And this is the first of a series of national events we'll run to help support practices to develop, implement, and continuously improve their sustainability action plan. So in this context, I would like to thank especially Caroline Pitcock, Paul Reedy, Rosie Adams-Schimminger, and Talina Edwards, who developed the template that can be widely adapted by any architectural practice in Australia. I'm also extremely pleased that all our national architecture associations have come together to help Architects Declare to present this series. So I personally would like to thank Nadine from the AIA Sustainability Action Forum, Catherine from the ACA, Calliope and Jamie from ArchiTeam, Justine from Parlour, Tiffany and all the volunteers from EmAGN. And I would also like to thank Peter Racebeck and Sarah from the Melbourne School of Design for supporting this event and hosting us all tonight. And my apologies for apparently using the wrong label for MSD. I'd also like to thank Jeremy from Breathe, JCB, BVN, and Cox Architects for their support and offers to be involved. And my sincere apologies for anyone who I've forgotten. And finally, Ronja, Verity, and Usma from my office for your patience in the hard work to put on this event. So tonight we are here together to learn from others who have already made some great progress in developing a sustainability action plan. And we would like to share their insights and learnings from moving their firms towards a sustainable design practice. So first, I would like to welcome Alexandra Morrison and Adam Coleswood from John Wardle Architects to the stage. They're both associates of John Wardle Architects. And when I was reading your bio, I got sidetracked and I had a preview of the presentation, and I was so gobsmacked that I couldn't actually focus on introducing you. So you got to introduce yourselves. It's an amazing presentation. I'm very pleased that you can present tonight. Yeah, thank you.
I won't say too much about us. JDBA tends to put a lot of slides in, so we're going to try to get through all of this as efficiently as we can. And thank you very much for having us tonight. I pulled this image out we tend to use this image quite a bit because it sort of embodies our ideas of craft and materiality and detail. But also, I thought it's appropriate in this context because it probably speaks to the amount of effort and resources and time that it actually takes to build up some of the work that we're sharing tonight. And it's reflective of about the last 2.5 years of a lot of people's time that have put into this. So it's nice to share this with you. So JDBA is a practice of about 120 people, and that's spread over 2 states. So we've got a main office here in Melbourne, an office in Sydney, and an outpost in Tasmania. So we're quite a large group. We don't all think in the same way, but when it comes to systems and applying like sustainability across the practice, we know that it has to work for everyone within the practice and how the practice works. It's also a practice that's grown not rapidly, but very slowly in the almost 15 years that I've been there. So we know change doesn't happen fast within the practice, but it's quite deliberate and specific, and reflects how we work, how we communicate, and how we service our projects. I have a particular relationship with this building. So this is a JDBA building, for those of you that might not know. We often use this as a benchmark for both good and bad. There's lots of lessons learned here. It's been a decade since it's been completed, and 13 since it's been designed. And I thought it was interesting just to note that some of the innovation and work that was put into this project in terms of sustainability is, it's come a long way in that decade since completion. So I think there's some positive things to note, and sort of retrospectively look back on this building and looking forward. So, as I said, it's about 2.5 years of work since we started sort of tackling this issue. And for us, we sort of approached it from a big picture strategy and how we implement change. So our job and the team that worked on all this was about building a roadmap to sustainable practice. And we know who we are sort of as designers and ideas around storytelling and craft and detail, like that first image, and we know how we engage with our community. What we didn't have was a very clear kind of approach to how we saw sustainability at JDBA. So our job was to really take all those things and build a map that's specific to JDBA in the way that we think, but also come up with some ways to be able to actually influence our own behaviors and our way of thinking. We know those things need to change within the practice, but also asking better questions along the way. It's important to put some context for us around how we approach these issues. The bulk of our work sits within these 3 sectors, so commercial, institutional, residential. They may not, residential doesn't necessarily reflect financially our investment, but from a research perspective and sort of generating ideas, the residential, single family residential is very important to us. Some of the issues that we have sort of observed from a sustainability side in these sectors is also quite important. So on the commercial side, there's lots of clients that are still operating as if it's the 1980s, and they're happy to monolithically pour concrete for the building and add some glass and walk away and sell it and be quite happy. Others have a very ambitious agenda, but it hasn't quite hit the ground, particularly with developers. Institutional jobs have a whole other set of ambitions, and it's quite exciting. They're they're often the ones bringing innovation to us and asking us to deliver. And residential, surprisingly, we've got clients that come and say, we'd like Living Building Challenge, we'd like Passive House. And another client will say, we don't want that sustainability crap, I'm not paying for it. So it's quite shocking. I think what's important to note is that these systems and these ways of thinking has to address all of those behaviors and attitudes. So we can't come with a heavy-handed approach because we know it's going to fail across a number of projects and sectors. I pulled this out. This was about early to mid 2020. A group had gotten together, and there'd been a lot of conversation about how do we move forward? What do we need? So this was our, and this is what we called it at the time. I haven't changed the name. The JDBA Sustainability and Biodiversity Research Action Plan. So SBRAP, probably not as smooth as SAP. So it didn't quite stick, but what we did feel the need to do was actually map this out quite specifically in terms of the time and resources, who was going to do the work. So this was just saying in the next 6 months, we think there's about almost 2,000 hours of work to achieve what we really want to achieve. And that's kind of in an expedited way. And that was to feed back to the practice that we were serious about it, that we were committed, but also we needed the practice's commitment to that time. So yeah, it wasn't a SAP, but it was a very intentional approach. So we have, essentially we've got two streams of attack for sustainability. We have in the top row, an environmental management system, which is really the framework, the kind of scaffolding, which includes things like policies and protocols and forms. In some ways it's formal, but it's still quite crude and open-ended. On the other side of that, we've got a research and development team, which is about knowledge, it's about support and engagement with both the practice internally, but also consultants and clients outside the practice. And that's kind of a growing body of knowledge, which would encompass things like capability statements, case studies, material systems and databases. So there's a kind of growing body of knowledge that sits there. And we didn't think we could have one without the other. So we didn't think the kind of formal system stood up within the practice without the support. And we didn't think having a team without a kind of clear direction forward was the most efficient way to go about this.
So the team structure and who we are. It started with a rogue group of people, maybe about 4 years ago, and they waged a war on waste in the office. They were the first people to challenge our thinking and our habits on everything from how we drank coffee, what we did with our food scraps, what we grew in our veggie patch, what we ate at our staff lunches. They developed creative ways to recycle our yellow trace, and they even suggested eliminating printing. This was 4 years ago, remember. But ultimately what they did was they changed our behavior, and they dared to do that with individuals in the office and at home. So this cultural shift then paved the way for a more formal sustainability research group to emerge. And this group then challenged the office's approach to sustainability in our design practices. The group recognised a need for a support role in the office to help project teams and the practice make informed and best practice decisions. Fundamental to the group's role is also the need to build the practice's research knowledge in this area. By educating ourselves through research, we better place ourselves to communicate ideas and develop informed solutions specific to each project. Design, research, and storytelling are core to how we as a practice communicate our ideas. So we recognise that these steps are key to integrating sustainable solutions rather than just adding them on. The team now is led by a partner who can advocate it for us at the highest level. It is run by 3 dedicated associates and we are assigned a dedicated student or student resource. Its success is based on the fact that we are formally recognised within the office, and it needs to be led by a partner or some senior person who can advocate for you, or at least to push the communication and the ideas up to the decision makers. How we work. The group is open and democratic, whereby anyone is welcome to join and contribute with fresh ideas, knowledge, and/or research abilities. We have dedicated time we attribute to the research we do, and we hold fortnightly meetings. We set tasks with clear agendas and realistic timeframes for completion, and we formally present progress on the group's work to senior teams in quarterly and biannual meetings. Here you can see a snapshot of a Miro board pinup board, which is sort of the group's live document. And this is where we can post, edit, and record ongoing research as it evolves. We use this forum a lot within our project work and find it very successful and a good way to share and communicate our knowledge. So our sustainability research methodologies. The group's tasks are essentially broken up into three main areas. We call them the cheat sheet, materials lab, and case studies. The focus of the tasks is on the big picture problems, so reducing embodied carbon and operational carbon. This is where we believe we can play a big role and make significant difference with our designs. Cheat sheet. Now, it may sound simple, but we found it fundamental that we create a glossary of terms for our staff. This helped provide clarity on some of the ambiguous terminology out there, which can be misleading. Having clarity on key terms helps promote a consistent language across our staff at all levels, and we can advocate for sustainability across the board then. The cheat sheet also comprises of a resource tool to help project teams reach sustainability targets across all stages of their project. It's kind of like a checklist. We have also devised a sustainability matrix tool to be used for internal design assessment and implementation early on in the design process. And Adam will touch on this again a bit later. The case studies. In our efforts to tackle the big picture targets, we have undertaken research where we analyse recent past projects and study the data of their embodied and operational carbon. The research is designed to be proactive rather than reactive. So we go in with open and critical minds. The idea is to work collaboratively with our consultants and other organisations through workshops to help build research about materials analysis, building performances, and life cycle assessment data. Above is an example of a recent case study analysis involving operational carbon. And you can see here that we present the case studies in a graphically consistent and clear manner for each building to help analyse the data across all the projects. Embodied carbon and the superstructure. By utilising technical information already embedded in our BIM models, we are very quickly able to dissect a building's makeup of materials and then generate data on embodied carbon for the superstructure, for instance. We again record the data in a graphically consistent, presentable and clear manner, which helps us analyse information across multiple projects and communicate lessons learned back to the design team. The idea, though, is that we start to build our own database of technical information that is specific to our design practices. And in doing so, we become more knowledgeable and better informed about how our buildings come to be. From this wealth of data, we are trying to find efficiencies or a best practice approach that is adaptable to future projects in the earlier phases of design when it is crucial. Embodied carbon in the envelope. We perform the same materials extractions in BIM for the building's envelope in our search for a rule of thumb methodology. The task is arduous, and sometimes we have more questions than answers. By retrospectively scrutinising our designs, however, we are actively learning from ourselves and starting to understand what we have control over, what we can influence, and what we cannot control. Importantly, we are daring to challenge our design habits for leaner and more resilient outcomes. The materials lab. This is another area of focus for our research group. And And here we've begun collecting data on common materials and component systems typically used in our design practice. Sustainable information like embodied energy data, EPDs, origin of materials, square meter rates, recyclability, and certifications are all tabulated and readily accessible to staff. Having a library for sustainable materials data means we have more time to consider different materials, test concepts, and make more informed choices earlier on in the design phase. Above is an example of how we've extrapolated relevant data from the table on the left and used it to explore the embodied energy of a proposed folded weathering steel screen system. We factored in the embodied energy of raw sheet, folded and perforated, and then to the fixed framing system. And this all had to be done really quickly because the, if you remember, Adam, the developer told us we didn't have enough money for our currently designed screens. We had to come up with a much cheaper option. So we could plug all this data into and work out whether the weathering steel was also not very environmentally friendly. The internal library. To help consolidate our collective knowledge across the practice, we have set up an internal library on our intranet system, which records our research and analysis and documents exemplar case study projects. Having an internal library for our sustainability research makes information central, public, and readily accessible for all to use. It requires a bit of ongoing maintenance though, and management, and currently this is done by a member of the sustainability team. So the work is arduous. Yeah, and it will only become much more arduous as the library builds. Knowledge sharing. Keeping our staff informed, local, and interested is key to the group's goal to educate, from the bottom up and the top down. To keep up with current and local precedents, industry issues, local affairs, etc., we post notices on platforms like Teams, intranet, morning tea presentations, and Instagram on occasion, to help keep the issues at the forefront of people's mind. We host a talk series throughout the year. First part is internal speaker series, which focuses on learning from ourselves, whereby a project architect presents the successes and failures of sustainable design principles on their current projects. And then we have the external speaker series, which focuses on learning from others. And here we invite a series of industry experts to present on relevant subjects. And people we've had in the past include Richard Stokes from Arup, Shane Esmore from Yormo Lai, Ross Harding from Finding Infinity, Professor Robert Crawford from Melbourne University, who presented on the EPIC database, ESD leaders from Lendleases, and many more. Workshops and collaborations with other consultants and industry experts help to consolidate our knowledge and thinking and keep us informed and engaged within the industry. We solely believe that with knowledge, we are better placed to make informed decisions and advocate at the highest level.
So this is just a diagram of that formal environmental management system. It sits kind of off the back of our primary quality assurance system, and it is ISO 14001 certified. So it's fairly simple. There's policies, there's protocols, there's forms, and it branches between kind of the internal operations within practice and design. So within each side, it's actually quite limited. Just on the operations side, I won't go into too much on this. It's essentially the day-to-day running of the practice. It's looked after by lots of people, from accounts to practice management to reception, really. And it's the bulk of this sits kind of off the back of our carbon neutral certification. So that's kind of the primary instrument, and sort of measurement of how the practice itself is sort of standing up in terms of its environmental footprint. So lots of people involved in that. The other, so the design and the operations were intentionally separated. So on the design side, this is largely about project teams. It's about their sort of day-to-day operations and how they address sustainability. All in all, it's probably 5 A4 pages I'll go through sort of briefly, each one of those. The kind of main tool there is this sprawling Excel document that is probably bigger than it really should be. But also this is about not burying teams in paperwork, because we know that's not really what project teams want to be doing and not what they're best at. So the policy, the design, the environmental policy design is really a high level document. It's about 3 pages. It's got our design-based objectives. It describes how we manage sustainability at that high level. It formally establishes the EMS, the research group that we're both part of. It talks about communication controls. It addresses the need for education and knowledge management in the practice. It addresses life cycle considerations. It's also submission ready. So it's kind of set up for if we need it to form part of a submission, it can easily be inserted in those things, and it's reassessed annually. This is just the protocol. This is fairly straightforward. It's a 1-page kind of checklist, if you will, starting earlier than what our QA system would. So it's trying to get early engagement, even at pre-design or at feasibility stages. It basically says, you've got to look at these lists, you've got to address all these issues at the project level. It's auditable, it's reportable, it's fairly straightforward, and hopefully it's unambiguous. I'll go through a little bit. This is in a little bit of detail. This is the environmental framework matrix. This is the sprawling kind of Excel document. It reads somewhere between a checklist and a safety and design sort of risk management document. But it's not a checklist. It's really about trying to find opportunities and risks within a specific project. So it's set up that it could apply to either a single family residential project or a large commercial project. It sits, the assessments are done by category, so operational energy, material systems, etc. It's a collaborative tool. So this is something that is not just handed over to projects. We actually need to not hold project teams' hand, but we need to step through with them. The knowledge can be quite variable across projects and project leaders, so we understand that it requires a little bit of time invested in those projects, and it's sort of constantly beta. So after each project review, this document constantly gets sort of updated and tweaked. So it's a kind of ever-changing thing. And just as an example, this is a project in Tasmania. It sort of looks at a good, better, best approach. So what this does is kind of allows us to sort of zoom out of the Excel document and see broadly if we're sitting more in the good, better, or best category, but also be able to compare across projects. It's still pretty high level, but it's adaptable, so you can kind of adjust things based on the project needs. So it's looking at high level things like making the building fully electric, addressing what the level of air permeability is in the project, thermal bridging, ratio of glazing to solid wall. So it's still quite high level, albeit fairly intense. And just a little bit more detail, zooming in on another project about sort of checking those boxes. It's intended to be front end, so it's projecting ahead. So it's not saying what you've done as a checklist, it's actually saying where the opportunities are on each project. And then off to the side on that same document, there's a sort of risk and opportunity. So that's identifying specific things within a project. So this, as an example, is a heritage building in Tasmania. It's got an industrial sort of overlay. It's a distillery, and it's in Tasmania. So what we're finding is projects in Tasmania, they're not so worried about operational energy because most of their energy is already renewable. So and our focus on those projects, and this goes to the UTES projects as well, is more about embodied energy. So there's a shift in focus, whereas a similar project in Brisbane would have a very different approach. I wanted to pull a few examples out. The kind of outcomes that we're seeing out of those assessments are, I guess there's successes and there's failures. What we're seeing is, in collaboration with consultants, what we're seeing is people like structural engineers are working in a very similar way and approach to their structures as we are for something like an external wall. So what the tools are kind of allowing us to see is sort of compatibility and similarities and approaches with the project teams and also output. So we're seeing the kind of bottom line of what the footprint is of a structural system is in the same way that we're looking at facade systems. We're also seeing the failures. So not to go into too much detail, the letter on the right was after a long sort of epic saga of trying to get a battery system into a school. It already had lots of solar. In fact, the solar it had on the roof would have made the building itself pretty much independent of any income electricity needs, but it was on a large campus. So we were pushing for a more campus-wide approach, a precinct approach. And this report that was generated from our ESD engineer basically said, it's just not worth it. And so it was this, while the outcome was bad, the kind of knowledge that was built up out of that exercise was actually incredibly powerful and incredibly beneficial. So even though there are failures, we're trying to leverage those failures across other projects. I've limited this to 10. There's been many challenges and roadblocks, and I've tried to put that in order, but every project is a little bit different. But number one at the top is habits and behaviors are really difficult to change, and that's both within the practice. We're all sort of forward thinking, but there's always a few people that don't see things in the same light as we do. Lack of momentum, we've talked about that. The need to implement these ambitions and initiatives as early on as in the project as feasible. It's often out of the control of the project architect or lead. They almost come on too late. Sustainability is sometimes seen as a limitation in design. JDBA buildings can be quite complex and complicated. The sustainability doesn't always overlay neatly. The diversity in project types, again, the differences we're seeing between Tasmania and Brisbane or South Australia are just incredible. So a single approach doesn't necessarily work for every project and every state and every client. Investment of time. We know project work always takes precedent, so there's a constant struggle with trying to put this at the front burner, educating the practice from the bottom up, just the inherent complexity behind implementing sustainability. It's still seen as nice to have. Often it's looked at as an add-on rather than an integral and first principle must-have, and the continuing need for more knowledge.
Thanks, Adam. Last slide, I promise you. So lessons learned and best ways forward for you. So crucial is you need the buy-in from the top. So you need your practice to be on board with your intentions, and you need them to advocate for you at the highest level. Early intervention, this was touched on by Adam as well. Embed it early on. At bid phase, put it in your scope, put it in your brief. It's often too late to deal with, as Adam mentioned earlier. So the earlier you have it in your designs, the better. Approach the work like it's a project. This is the work we do within in the backgrounds, the research and the additional work at all these protocols and policies. It needs to have dedicated time for it. The task is arduous, it takes time, it requires resources, and it requires also ongoing assessment and reassessment. Change is inevitable, so that continued support is also required ongoing. You need to keep up with the latest systems, with the latest data, with the latest information, and you need to keep current with the issues. It takes time and it also takes resources. So develop systems and approaches specific to your project. So like what we've done with our case study analysis, this is very specific to our practice approach. It also enables us to really look at our own projects and see where we can change ourselves, our own design practices, and embed them also into the next project. The way we work might not work for another firm, so it has to be individualized. Education is key, we've realized. We want to bring the whole practice on board. We want to educate them from the bottom up and the top down. And we need to share the knowledge universally across the whole office. And the final one is to build in flexibility with your action plans. One policy might not work for the next, and Adam sort of touched on the complexities between the different projects, the typologies and the clients. This is why you have to have flexibility as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra and Adam. Amazing presentation, and amazing how you managed to bring 2,000 hours of research into a half-an-hour presentation. So, yes. Can I invite Isabella White, Casa Ward, and Charlotte O'Toole to up here from Architects EAT. Isabella, Casa, and Charlotte are all three from Architects EAT, medium-sized practice. Is that correct? Medium-sized?
Small.
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 Small to medium-sized practice in Collingwood. All three of them bring different skills and passion, to the practice and to your projects. Lizzie has a passion as an artist and also a freelance graphic designer, and obviously focuses on marketing and social media. Cassia is an advocate for environmentally considered design and positive impact on local and broader communities. And Charlotte is an experienced interior designer in the practice. So we are looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we're here today to present Architects EAT's Sustainability Action Plan. And we are 3 out of the 5 members of our green team. I think we've got another member in the audience, Val. And before we get started, we're going to very, very briefly introduce ourselves. My name is Izzy. I'm an architectural grad. I studied at the University of Queensland, and I worked in Brisbane as a graduate before moving to Melbourne. I have a verging on obsessive interest in how architects communicate with the public. And this obsession brought me to the role I work in now, which is an in-house architectural media and communications manager at EAT.
I'm Cassia. I'm an architect. I have a background in education and community-based projects, and I grew up spending the summer canoeing through the Canadian wilderness, so I have a very big interest in preserving biodiversity.
Here. Hi, my name's Charlotte. I've been with EAT for a while now, and I'm on the commercial/interiors team. I'm a novice gardener, a failed handyman, and a bee enthusiast. I helped establish the green team as I have a keen interest in regenerative design principles.
All right, before we get going in our preso, we think it's really important to contextualize where EAT are at in our sustainability journey. We have to address the elephant in the room. EAT are in the infancy of going green. We work across hospitality, residential and commercial projects. It has been a slow journey understanding what sustainability even means for such broad typologies of work, if sustainability is even the right word to use anymore, but we are trying to change. So where are we at? I think some of you would have seen this before. This is a copy paste out of the Architects Declare template guide for SAPs. We've placed ourselves in stage 1, or the review stage. Our SAP is about how we will begin to change our office culture to start getting our projects to align with our goals. The foundational blocks of our SAP are based on the 11 guiding principles of the Architects Declare movement. Now, this page is actually included as an appendices in our SAP. And the way this table reads, you can see the 10 points in the black text and EAT's response directly below in the grey. And our responses form the basis of our action plan. And through this exercise, we found we could turn the concept of going green into actionable and tangible steps. Our SAP has been presented to and reviewed by everyone in our 24-person office. And the version we present to you today is representative of but a moment in time in an ongoing conversation in our office about how on earth we are going to go green. So without further ado, upskill or die, Architects EAT Sustainability Action Plan 2022. So this is our document, this is our SAP, and we mainly included this page so you know we've actually done one, not just a fun PowerPoint. And in case anyone thought we were joking about the name, which I will sort of explain later. Our presentation is a reformatted version of our SAP, but the words and the content are what you'll find in our document. We decided to structure our SAP by the what, the why, the how in detail, and the who. What is this document? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? And who is responsible for doing it? We also have an appendices, which is the Architects Declare, the page you've just seen, and the Paris Agreement. And the reason that we have these as an appendices is as a reference for what our guidelines and aspirations are based on and responding to. So section 1, the what. Our SAP outlines the actions that Architects EAT will undertake to improve the impacts of our projects and our internal operations on the environment. Our major aim of this document is to provide a framework structure for upskilling EAT staff. We've got a really big knowledge gap to overcome. There is so much information out there, it is overwhelming. And so the purpose of our document, the what, is to explain how we're going to start upskilling our staff to close our knowledge gap. That is step 1 for us. And while this document is for EAT staff, it is also for clients. And the point that we really stress in our what page is that sustainable outcomes are not a one-size-fits-all approach for us. A good outcome can look very different depending on the client priorities, budget, time frame, and site. And by focusing this document on upskilling our staff, it means we are giving them the tools to apply the best possible methods to have the best possible outcomes on their projects, whether that be a retail tenancy with a 5-year lease or a 6-story office building. So the next section is the why, and this ultimately asks us to define EAT's values. Why are we doing this? And we have distilled our why into 3 major reasons for engaging with the climate crisis. The first and the most obvious is that we care. We do, it is as simple as that. We care about our planet, and we see our role as critical in shifting the expectations and conversations around outcomes of built projects. Our industries are not neutral in the climate conversation, with construction accounting for approximately 40% of carbon emissions. 2, as a firm, we want to expand our professional relationships with clients that share our values. This document formalizes our approach in this space and will be used to show our genuine commitment to evolving our practice. And number 3, we want to equip our staff with the skills to seek out opportunities to positively impact the environment on their projects. This document will provide the framework for the required training that will make this a reality. So what is that framework? How are we going to close the knowledge gap? That's what our next section focuses on. It's largely based on internal education at this stage of our green journey, and I'm going to hand it over to Cass here.
So
What does that look like, right? Like what steps do we need to take today to make sure that we actually achieve the outcomes that we've set in the future? This page is taken directly out of our sustainability action plan. It outlines the actionable steps EAT are taking to upskill our team and educate our clients. This is a messy living document. We review it, we update it, we put a date on it as well so that we can keep track of our progress. When we set a target for 2030 or 2050, this is really important. And this is how we get there. This is how we actually achieve it. So we're going to take you through how this document works and how it works for us. First and foremost, it's organized by time frame based on how long we expect each step to take. It's organized into now, future, and future. And then within that, split between our internal office operations on the left, how are we going to improve our internal practices? And then on the right, our architectural outcomes. How can we create a positive impact through our projects? The now column is things that we have either already achieved this year or will by the end of this calendar year. So this is things like going carbon neutral or creating easy guides for our resi and commercial projects for our staff to use. The future column is steps that we anticipate we can achieve in the next 3 years. So we're talking in 2025, achieving reduction targets for embodied energy in the products that we specify. We are looking at the end of life process for the material samples that come into our office and how we can reduce waste in those ways. The future column is outcomes that we have set to achieve by 2030. This is where we have set specific measurable outcomes for our practice across all of our projects. As you can see, the steps are color coded, which again helps us to keep track of how we're going. Green means that it's complete, orange means it's in progress, and red flags to us that we haven't actually started working on this yet, and so we need to give it more attention. So we know you probably can't read it that well at the moment, so we're going to go through a few examples of what can be found in this document. We're going to go through one from the now category, one from the future, and one future. So something that we've completed is we achieved carbon neutral certification this year for our operational carbon, which is really exciting. We did it through NOCO, who we found through Architects Declare, and they were super helpful through the whole process. So we're very excited about that. We're also in the process of building a digital library of environmentally positive products. Because we've set such specific targets in our SAP, we need to make sure that there's a resource available to our team members so that they can actually select the materials that are in line with those targets. We're trialing a software called Airtable to test if it's the right fit for our practice, but basically our requirements are that it's easily accessible by all staff, it's easy to use, it's easy to edit, and it can be filtered by specific data. So as an example, if we have a project that has very specific carbon reduction targets, we can filter it by the type of material, what has been flagged for carbon reduction, and generate a list of things that would meet the brief. This sort of resource will help all staff to easily source materials in line with our SAP targets, but what it also does is it helps us to think about our reduction targets when suppliers reach out to us, which ensures that all of the materials-based CPD presentations and samples coming into our office are relevant to our targets, which then helps us to upskill in line with our action plan.
Cool, the future phase, the steps we hope to tackle by 2030. The aim for this column is to really push all of our projects to consider green stuff holistically and to motivate our clients to take on our values. An example of our future goal is here, aiming to reduce our overall embodied and operational carbon by 30% across all projects before 2030, a target which we will evaluate throughout the process to determine whether it's too big or too little of a goal. To quickly break down embodied versus operational carbon for the students in the room, this is the carbon in the materials and construction of the project versus the carbon emitted during the in-use phase of the building. At the moment, we don't know how to do this. As Izzy said earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. This may include considering materials, repurpose of the site, energy efficiency, etc. We're taking the three main design constraints, site, budget, and brief, and prioritizing which areas will inform the sustainability aspects of the project. Earlier this year, we were fortunate enough to do a project at Burwood Brickworks, a project that meets the Living Building Challenge requirements. It showed us how to approach hospitality sustainably, which is an area that has currently been pushed to the back of the conversation. We learned how to break down the LBC requirements, mainly tackling non-toxic materials, where to source them, and how to manage expectations of builders on site, which overall helped us to develop our Airtable database. The big overarching EAT dream is to go beyond sustainability and neutrality and to become carbon positive and in the future regenerative, so that we're no longer contributing negatively to the Earth's impacts or just cancelling out to zero through offsets, but so that we're actually putting good back into the Earth, into the grids, into the waterways, into communities. We're a small company, so we can dream big. What form that will take, we don't know yet, but we're open to suggestions, willing to learn from others, and want to keep an open conversation. A big part of this is becoming B Corp certified, which we hope to do soon, which will inform a lot of our future goals. It's a big goal, but the integral push we need to keep driving our SAP intentions. What else are we doing this for except our future planet? So this is the how in detail, the cleaner version of the previous how document, page directly taken from our sustainability action plan. This is the evaluation, the making of all future goals and tasks tangible, the actual process of how to carry out our dreams. Here is the breakdown of how to integrate the relevant SAP steps at each stage of a project, from up the top conception through to design development on into construction and possibly demolition or design for deconstruction. We'll start prioritizing time between each stage to discuss what green achievements we want to make for each project. We want to show that it's not harder to implement this throughout the design process or adding extra time. It's just about changing how you use your time. This transparency helps to inform our staff as well as the clients as to the detailed breakdown of what our future process is going to look like. So it's not just this scary conceptual thing, which is often what turns people off sustainability. We aim to start small scale with precedent projects and then take it beyond through to all of our work. We presume the hard work will be at the beginning and we will need to engage external consultants to help us along this path. And then once we achieve this, we can reevaluate our targets and set ourselves new ones.
Okay, the final section of our document is the who. So in our SAP, this page covers off the different roles we've created in our office in relation to going green, who is nominated for each role, and what their responsibilities are. And we actually ummed and ahed about keeping this in the document, and it was feedback from the staff that was the decider to keep it in. While we think this is everyone's responsibility, in order to change some established habits and practices within our firm, we needed to name some champions of change so as to provide people with accountability. Our who section also includes this diagram. So this is a pretty generic team structure, but there was a couple of important things we needed to communicate with our team through this diagram. So firstly, this is not a top-down approach. Our green team is responsible for the training and the education of all of our staff and for providing resources and materials to the team. We report to the directors about our initiatives and our goals, and they support us and enable us to do our job. On the other side of the diagram, that way for you guys, we have disruptors who are responsible for hosting project crits that review stages of the project against the SAP. And lastly, the single point of accountability for SAP outcomes on a project is the project leader. It's not the director and it's not the green team. And it was really important to be clear about this expectation with our team. So finally, we have an appendix in our SAP. And this is where we talk about the Paris Treaty, the 1.5, now 2-degree change we're also desperately trying to avoid, and the Architects Declare principles. And we decided to include this as an appendix because our action plan is just that. It is a series of actions. And our appendix includes the growing list of resources that help us decide on those actions. So even having taken 6 months to prepare this document, and the green team was established, I think 2 years before that, we're not done. This is still a work in progress. You may have noticed this document only focuses on environmental outcomes. We know our next step is to include social, economic, and cultural solutions, as well as biodiversity strategies to address an increasingly urgent global shift to regenerative architecture. We have realized that if we don't make changes now, our industry will move ahead and we will be left behind. Hence the reason we are trying to upskill. And I hope you are too, or we die. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Don't die yet. So we still got a panel to go to. So it's no rush. But thanks for a very refreshing presentation. That was very good. And it was very good to sort of, demonstrate that you are at a sort of different point in your journey, and actually to demonstrate that it's a journey and it's it's work in progress and there's no perfect solution and no one fits all solution. So in that context, so can I invite the 5 presenters as well as James, Deb and Missy and David Henderson is here. Yeah, sort of up here. So what I thought we do is we do a little panel discussion based on the presentations that we had. So Apollo. Oh, don't we have enough chairs? We need one more chair, do we? Oh, no, actually, we're gonna play musical chairs and then so if that's all a little bit chaotic. So the first Velvet Underground concert was very chaotic, and apparently everybody who attended that concert set up a band afterwards. So if everybody can walk away with a sustainability action plan after that get together, I think we'll have yes, have achieved a lot. So Bethel, how are we going to do this technically? I'm just asking questions.
It's going to be there.
Yeah.
Okay, this might take it all the way back to here.
Yes.
Is that okay? It's all right. You're all going to talk.
We can just pass this around. As well.
We're
Yeah,
a
you
panel,
can.
we need to talk. It's part of the gig.
All right. So the way we do it is, so anybody who's watching on Zoom can obviously put questions into the chat box, and we can look them up and then relay them to the panel. I'll be sort of talking in the background. Bertie, you're going to walk around with the microphone? Is that how it works?
Yeah, and I'll walk around with the roving mic to take questions from the audience.
So yeah, anybody who has any questions, obviously feel free to spot Verity and ask her for the microphone. So again, thanks everyone for the presentation. It was really amazing, and thanks for all your effort, and thanks everyone for actually coming here tonight and sort of obviously being part of it. I mean, I have a lot of questions, and I'll only ask one, and obviously leave it up to you to sort of to sort of start from here. I guess my question is, let's say if you would compare how you run a project now compared to how you did that, let's say 10 years ago, the same type of project, what's different? How at any stage of the project, how do you, would you design it differently? Is the form finding differently? Is the selection of materials different? Do you use different consultants, different contractors? How do you communicate with your clients? Anybody who would like to sort of, maybe.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah, thanks, James.
I'd say yes, it would be different. The main thing being, I think what was illustrated through both of the presentations, both of which were great, I have to say. The main thing being is that you learn, and you're always learning and getting more information as you practice architecture. And so we've had an interest in sustainability our entire practice at 6 Degrees, but it's really just an iterative process of learning more and more and more. And I think as long as you're engaged and interested, And at some points, you'll do something and you'll think, and you'll find out later you really shouldn't have used that material. It's not a great material to use. It's too late. You've done it now, but you found out later on because for whatever reason. So yes, I think it's an iterative process that you just keep learning, and I think this structure helps with that. Yes.
I can maybe address that also just in the context of this building, since it has been 10 years. I mean, I did a little walkthrough just to sort of reacquaint myself with the building, but it still looks like a building that we would design today. So I don't know that you would see the outcome necessarily in the kind of space and place that those buildings occupy. But I recall even looking at embodied carbon back 10 years ago, we were just in our sort of infancy of understanding it. I know we did a pretty extensive exercise of looking at the zinc screens around the building, and was zinc the best material? There was lots of dialogue and conversation about that. And I look back at the work we did then, and I think we've come quite a long ways. We might have come to the same conclusion at the end, but our kind of methodology and approach has really changed over that 10 years. Certainly in the technical understanding and development and detailing of facades and external walls and roofs and things, I think we would probably look at ourselves as fairly naive, if I'm being honest, about how we would detail those things 10 years ago. We've actually, I mean, it's still, we don't have all the answers, but I think we're now 10 years later starting to sort of ask the right questions at least, and getting in with the teams and trying to lead them in the right direction as early on as possible. So I think the building itself might be similar or the same, but we would definitely go about it quite differently.
So you can blame your predecessors. All your fault. So Deb, what about your practice? You've been practicing modern.
So I've practiced overseas as well as in Australia, and I think I think the main thing is just pushing advocacy, and really, we've got to be the ones that are responsible for, driving this agenda with our clients. And I think now that it's becoming more and more out there in terms of just the general public conversation, and obviously even more so now in Australia with issues like bushfires and flooding, that we can't avoid having that conversation. And I think things like getting SOPs in place and really starting to have those conversations with clients are going to shape the way that we design buildings. And I think certainly even just things like installation values, construction, and thinking about passive principles, some of those conversations didn't even happen 10 years ago, and they're so simple that we should just be doing them without thinking about them. So I think it's just the main thing is just our thinking's changed, really.
David, what about your practice? So David Henderson is from Cox Architecture, obviously known for a range of buildings that had a huge environmental, social, economic, and environmental impact. So obviously you work in a slightly different field to a lot of us, but I'd be interested in sort of know how obviously you have a sustainability action plan in your practice. How do you approach it?
Yeah, I guess we're fairly early in the process as well in terms of formalising our sustainability in the more contemporary sense in response to Architects Declare and more recent sort of increasing consideration about embodied carbon and things like that. So I prefer to answer this question in about 12 months' time when we're starting to get a few more of these things in place. I think looking back 10 years, a lot of our projects did consider sustainability and had some really good passive components to them. And I think over those last 10 years, some of our projects have been really good in that sense, but a lot of them have also been sort of very directed by developers and clients and builders in terms of the outcomes and the dilution of those, and also the reliance on sustainability consultants whose scopes don't necessarily match the reliance that we've placed in them to give us sustainable outcomes and have good outcomes in the projects. I think there's been an evolution in compliance and regulations and sustainability in terms of insulation values and Section J, and these things have improved the performance of our buildings in a natural sense without having to do a lot, because there's been no choice whether developers want to value manage things or not. There's certain things that have had to be put in place. But yeah, give us 12 months and we've got some fairly ambitious things that we're trying to achieve. And it's fantastic to see JWA's process and where you're at. I think we're part way along there. There's a lot of things that we've got on a list, to-do list. We've got a very long to-do list at the moment, and a lot of the things that you put in place are really impressive. So well done.
Yeah, so you're saying you've got very ambitious sort of targets. So where do you see the biggest hurdles to achieve them? I mean, how do you get other parties sort of on board? Obviously, I'm sure every architect thinks of how to get my clients on board. How to work with consultants, with authorities, and how to work with construction contractors, to achieve our targets.
I think that what's been talked about this evening has been bringing staff along and educating staff, which obviously is important, but just as important, I think, is educating clients and bringing them along. And one simple thing that we've had in place for a long time is essentially just a list of sustainability initiatives, things that you can do in a building, but everything from passive design through to CLT and all sorts of things basically. And then against that, a degree of difficulty and also an indication of cost. So is it expensive? Is it cheap? Is it low hanging fruit or whatever? And taking clients through that. So and you're always adding to the list as well, but you've got something that you can actually take your client through and say, this is important. Some of this stuff you'll be very interested in, and other stuff you might be interested in and you might not. It might be too expensive, it might not, but at least actually taking them through that, and then being in a position where you come out the other end of the process with a pretty good idea of what you can hope to achieve on the project. And hopefully you've pushed, because as you've indicated, that clients will come in many different shapes and sizes, and some will be more interested than others. But you'll probably push them further than they were prepared to go, or further than they thought they might go, just from that educational process, I think.
I had a question leading on from that, James, so if you've got the client on board, then maybe JWA people could answer this, or then what happened? Have you come across challenges then with sub-consultants? So you come in with great ideas and the client's on board with you, but then you hit hurdles with sub-consultants, and how have you overcome those, or not? Have they mostly been on board as well?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's not just a client problem. We find sometimes our sub-consultants let us down. Sometimes they're not engaged to us as well. So we've got that additional hurdle to leap over and to bring them on board as well. It's an ongoing battle. We can't say we've got the answer to it directly. It's project to project sort of thing. But definitely try and bring our consultants on board early and involve them in our designs early as well. Try and bring them on board. The same way we bring our clients and the consultants on board with our design ideas, we want to bring them on board with the sustainability concepts and all of it's a holistic approach, basically. So we want them to be on board with us to implement everything. And even with the builders as well, you need to bring them on board later. We find once they're on board, it's a much more cooperative and smooth process, but it doesn't always happen. And yeah, it's a good question, because it's a problem. Yeah, and I think you gave an example of one in our presentation.
One of the issues we're addressing, even outside of sustainability, is consultant scope. So we've recently taken on an exercise of clarifying and expanding and writing what we think is consultant scope. And part of that is because, there's different procurement models. We're often not engaged in them, or they're being engaged at design development stage, and the client's writing a scope that's perhaps inadequate. And so we're trying to build that in so that, and I'll give the example, there was an ESD consultant on a school, and it wasn't even a Green Star. They had their own sort of checklist system, which was Green Star-like. It was like Green Star Light. But outside of that scope, they had no ability to kind of assist the project whatsoever. And so there was a whole raft of things that the project could have benefited from, but the consultant wasn't actually engaged to offer the services on those things at all. So there's challenges around just sort of fitting what the project needs and what the project opportunities are with what the right consultant can actually offer. So there was nothing wrong with the consultant. They weren't actually engaged to do more than the very basic minimum services, and it's kind of a letdown to get to that point in a project and not be able to lean on some of those consultants to answer those questions. Like we need those people to service the project, but also assist us in that lead role, which we're often put in.
So that's again educating the client, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Or sometimes it's if it's kind of DD or later, it's hard. The later the project runs towards construction, the harder it is to initiate those things. So there's those conversations get more difficult as the project carries on in time.
Well, I just think that the SAP should be, one of the reasons presumably for putting it on our websites is that it can be an educational tool for the clients as well, that they can actually see it.
Yep.
Hopefully read it.
So do you think you can do more upfront at the start of a project to get everybody on board? I mean, for example, our practice, we are small practice, with sort of small scale residential work. And when we put the project brief together, sustainability is one of the, it's just one of the next to, but whatever the budget is usually hidden somewhere, sort of, between point 14 and 17. But sustainability is a big section, and which actually I think helps getting clients on board early and just actually set the expectation. So is it something that you do that you or feel like you can't do, or I don't know how I don't know, where's the point where influence sort of external parties, or do you think we have enough actually influence or power over the parties that we work with to actually get them on board?
Okay. I think so. We've had a lot of conversations internally about exactly that, like what's the best way to approach a client and like really get them on board, because it is so important, as we've discussed. And what we found is education is so important because a lot of clients think that sustainability is going to be more expensive by default, which it isn't. Or that if it's a higher upfront cost, it might have lower operational costs, which is something they might not have considered. And so we've been going back and forth a lot internally, and we've incorporated a lot of it into our SAP about possible ways that we can actually get the client on board, whether that's having like a specific meeting with them in the beginning to explain to them how these principles can affect their project and the positive outcomes we can generate, and like how can we get them on board from the beginning. And then once we have a solid concept with them, how can we then explain it to consultants down the track, and so that they understand when they're sending through fee proposals exactly what's expected, and like getting the client on board from the beginning. Yeah, which just is so important.
We also put a couple of things into our terms and conditions, which are pretty basic things. So we say for commercial, the first line is our test is would I work in it, and under residential, it's our test is would I live in it. And then likewise, we have minimum 7.5 star NATAs for residential as well. So just little things that are pushing slightly beyond what the code says, a bit beyond, just that they're in the terms and conditions, so you can point to them later. You haven't rammed too much down their throat yet, but you have actually just pushed them a little bit further than they might have started.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that approach between commercial and residential and values associated. Obviously, there's an economic value across the board for those two typologies. But the value of a residential client and sustainability is so different to the commercial values of a client. How do you, there's a different approach in terms of communicating to both of those clients the values of sustainability. How do you go about navigating that?
Well, I've got a microphone. I'll say something. I don't know. I mean, I completely agree. They are completely different, and in some ways, it's easier to talk to a resident who's going to be living in it. But in many ways, if you're doing multi-res, then it becomes harder because you might be talking to a developer or a development manager. However, the market seems to have moved a long way over the last 5 to 10 years as well. And particularly, presumably, not just through Nightingale, but through other developers like them, where there's now a desire, an educated public who wants better outcomes. And there's a whole lot of built rubbish that people can see what you get when you don't have such good outcomes. So I think there's ways in which you can explain that to a residential client, be it a developer or an individual. And I think it's just a different conversation you might have with a commercial client. And in many ways, a commercial client can be easier because it may come down to running costs. If they're actually going to keep the building and they're going to rent it out, then they want to have good running costs and good maintenance. So sometimes it's easier. Or they may, like you said, they may not be interested. So I think the community generally is getting people more interested and engaged, and the conversation has moved on, thank God. But there is still a long way to go, and the conversations still have to be had.
I think one thing I was going to maybe say build on what James was saying was, I think the one thing though that can bridge that gap between those two separate clients is sort of terminology and how we discuss benefits, and it's understanding what that client is after in terms of what is meaningful to them from a sustainability perspective. Obviously, with more commercial clients, a lot of time it's frankly bottom line, and trying to say to them what the economic benefits are, and also what the benefits they can get from the way that they market the buildings. For example, we're starting to talk to multi-res clients who are a bit more forward thinking about, do you want to be ahead of the curve or do you want to be behind it? You know, do you want to be selling the best thing out there that's going to attract the best investors, that's going to sell super quickly? And whereas for a residential client, it could be on a renovation, they've bought effectively a weatherboard that's got no insulation and they just want to know that their energy bills aren't going to go through the roof. So I think whilst it might be different in terms of what the clients are themselves, I think there is that sort of commonality at the same time.
Yeah, we can probably only speak to from a commercial perspective. We don't do many sort of owner-occupied residential buildings, but we're finding a few more developers that are holding on to the assets, who do have a longer-term interest in maintaining and reducing ongoing power costs, and understand the value of the asset in the long term if it is going to meet sort of or future requirements in terms of, you know, the regulations are going to continually get more onerous and like. With commercial clients, there's a few ways you can approach it, and haven't really worked out the best way yet either. And they are all very different. We've got some that are incredibly aspirational, and they want to, try and be the best, where there's others that are only interested if it doesn't cost them anything more in terms of the build cost, even if they are holding on to it. But you can do things like look at the underlying drivers, the companies, and what their commercial values are, and some of that stuff's available on their websites, and sort of go in the back door and try and the people who are face to face for the clients are not necessarily across all those things. We've had some success with getting electrification of buildings in some buildings where it's purely driven by the market and the expectations of where they want to pitch the commercial office product with the tenants that they want to attract, and the expectations from the tenants in the future. So that the market drivers are probably one of the strongest things to achieve things.
Yeah, I'm very intimidated by the people I'm surrounded by. But commercial is a very different conversation, isn't it? Especially or commercial or hospitality. And we're all talking about long-term, but there's also short-term design projects that we get quite often, cafes, restaurants, things that have a 5 to 10 year turnaround. And we also have to consider sustainability for them as well. And often it's a really hard conversation to have because you really have to sell it. Like if there's no cost benefit, they're not going to do it. What the conversation is moving towards now, I think, is potentially design for deconstruction for those short-term projects, which is really exciting if you're coming in as a client with a fit out and you can take away those things after the fact, and you're not losing money, you can take it away and set up elsewhere, then that's also a really important thing. And that's a totally different sustainability consideration to just materials or site or anything. It's about the value to the client itself, I think.
Yeah, I think this is in general, sorry. I think this in general, I think our role as architects, I mean, we're trying to, we have clients coming to us with a problem. They may not necessarily know what the problem is, but we are identifying it, and our role is to find a solution. So, I mean, nobody went to Mies van der Rohe and said, I want to have a glass box, so they came with a problem and he said, this is my solution for you. So I think that's our opportunity too as architects, and what you were saying is very interesting, to design for deconstruction. It's a pretty interesting thing to do, as an architect, it's pretty exciting that you have the opportunity and have a commercial client who you might be able to get on board, to realize your ideas. So anyway, so questions.
Hi, yeah. I suppose to varying degrees of success, architects have been struggling with this for over 50 years. James, not quite as long, obviously, but 6 degrees have been at this for quite a long time. I just wanted to ask you what you think. The landscape's changed quite recently. What do you think the most significant changes have been? And also for the people who are kind of starting on this journey, what do you think are the same obstacles that you've been facing for 20 odd years or more? 30 odd years. Okay. So, just from that kind of framework of picking up the mantle where others have left off, what do you think, what has changed? What might have caused that apart from climate change and the awareness of it?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'm rambling. Go.
Recycled materials have become more expensive. Look, a lot's changed. I guess when we started, we couldn't afford interesting materials, so we were grabbing them from wherever we could. So it wasn't just for sustainability. We wanted to use materials that had a patina and had a history to them and had a story behind them. So we sort of invented this architecture of assemblage, and we carried that through our first few projects. And then, interestingly, it did become harder as the projects became larger, harder to involve it both in to the scale that we wanted to, but also in terms of getting the builder on board or enabling it in a much larger project. So that's what's changed, I guess, for us. But I think also what has changed, 30 years ago, we would talk about sort of passive solar design principles, but not much else really. No one would be talking about embodied energy. So I think the language and the education of both the industry and the public has gradually changed across those 30 years. And it's changed, you know, fundamentally, it's great that it's changed, and it's everyone's, including ourselves, are way more aware of the issues around construction, around architecture. I think probably not enough people are still quite across what the low-hanging fruit is, what we should be doing without thinking, almost, both in the architecture profession and particularly in the construction profession more broadly, but also in the wider community. But even that's changing, I think, because there's so much more conversation around it. So in terms of what we can do, where we can go from here, I think things like the SAP are great, because it starts to, I mean, for us, although we've got lots of things in place, they're scattered, and there wasn't really a structure around them. So we had these lists and checklists and lists of suppliers and materials that we were happy using, and gradually things would come onto that list and other things would fall off, as I said earlier, because we'd find out that they didn't have such great pedigree after all, or whatever. So we've built these things, but what the SAP is allowing us to do is to then kind of coalesce them into something, into a structure that we feel we can sort of share, and also help us to educate our clients, our larger clients with. I'm not sure whether that rambling answered your question.
Can I ask a question to both of you, or anyone? Something that comes up a lot, and that we're beginning our journey in, is these developments of the checklist and the one pages and the how-to guides, to upskill everyone. But what we're really struggling with is how to implement it so that it's not just another piece of paper that lives in a folder in a project that doesn't get opened, and so on and so forth. And I was just wondering if anyone could talk to how you go about checking they're being used, actually using them, what the audit process is, because we're coming up to that, and hopefully someone else in the audience is too. And I'd really appreciate hearing how you do that.
You're right, it's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, so another thing I think what we're using the SAP for is for that educational process for the rest of the office as well, to try and bring everyone along and to get everyone across the things that we've learned that you think some of us may well know backwards, but others might not. So we're using the SAP for that as well. So it's taking us longer than it probably should, because we're involving quite a lot of people in the process as a kind of educational tool. But in answer to your question, we try and embed it in our design discussions, so in our sort of design workshops. At some stage, and we're trying to, because we haven't finished the SAP, but the intention at the moment is that there will be champions who will need to come to meetings at certain points.
Can I get more specific? Like how often? Because we could say that too, but genuinely, how often are you doing this at concept, at schematic, at once you hit, when it's being built, is someone auditing? So like how?
Yes, but we haven't worked it out either.
Yeah, cool. That's cool.
Yeah, we can add to that. Yeah, ongoing problem. It is another piece of paper, essentially. For a project architect, that's a nightmare. So actually having a group and a team and someone who can advocate for that is important. And it really does take an individual to make sure they're going around, and this is at least in the latter phases. So it's implemented in all the with the project leaders. So someone actually goes along with a checklist and ensures that that's happening. But that's a relatively new form, and it's one of a lot. So it's a bit of a headache. But yes, putting in early, we're finding that's probably more important. So that's getting involved with the design team and even the bidding team. So finding we actually should be implementing it a lot earlier. And that's a challenge. And we mentioned the success of our group is that it's now overseen by a principal or a partner, and they're able to advocate and at least have that overview, and they're able to bring the ideas up further. So we were having a lot of conversations with ourselves essentially until that happened. And it definitely moves things more. But even things get through the partner as well. So yeah, we're talking about holding workshops with the design team. And it's communication essentially, and it's sharing knowledge and sharing the ideas. And there's a lot of knowledge that we're gaining, and we're constantly thinking this is amazing information. How do we get it out there? And you know, it takes time. It will happen, we believe that, but it's sharing knowledge, it's having the right people higher up to advocate for that, and it's holding workshops, it's talking a lot, it's having checklists. Really, we've implemented everything to try and get it through. And it's on every level.
So I was going to say it's way easier than getting people interested and involved in running spaces, though. So
Yeah.
Everyone's interested in sustainability.
There is a lot of information out there, and a lot of practices are doing a lot of amazing work. And Deb heads up our sustainability working group, and it works similar to the group. So just different names we're giving to it, and we meet at we speak up at design reviews, etc. But I wonder, I also head up our reconciliation action plan group, and we've just had discussions with Reconciliation Australia, and we're about to set up with other practices, a network industry ring. So there'll be an architecture wrap ring, and it will be bringing all of our information and learnings together to benefit the whole of all Australian practices, architectural practices. And I just wonder if that's like a kind of natural next step, because people seem to be doing a lot of work, and we're already busy people in the architecture industry. It's not an easy profession. And if, you know, people have had thoughts about how that could potentially work, yeah, bringing everyone together. They might meet quarterly, but sharing all of that information like tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I maybe say two things? Sorry. Just two things. I do think checklists are very useful. I mean, they sound really boring, but I think if you have a checklist for each project stage, which I'm sure most architectural practices would have, you know, you put, you know, at some point you have on your checklist, have you got a North Point on your plans? You can easily put, you know, have I achieved 7.5 star rating? And if you haven't achieved it, then you gotta go back to. So I think you can incorporate that into your checklist for each project stage, and I think it can be very useful. That was one thing. The other thing was, I think you made a very good point about sharing, and I think this is why Architects Clear, I think, can potentially be a very good platform to share. I mean, the idea is that you can actually, we do share, you know, that we promote the SAPs that practices have, and that we have a template that sort of practices can adapt. So I think sharing is very important, and I think this is one shift. Also answering a question from before. I think one shift that I have seen, I think 10 years ago, you would have said it's all very difficult, it's all very hard. Now, I think there's been a shift in our thinking that, you know, sort of say, oh, how can we support each other? You know, how can we actually share knowledge and experience? So I think that's good, you know. Sorry, Deb, yeah.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, Stefan, and also to the gentleman's point when he asked James a question earlier, is I think the one thing that's changed over my career is things are getting more complex. I think most people would agree. There's more risk. There's a lot more consultants out there that we have to deal with and manage, and just generally complexity across the board. So I think the more that we can help each other as a profession, and I don't think that's just limited to architects. We need to reach out to our consultants to find out who the good people are that want, you know, that share these values, and there are plenty of them out there, and even with builders, because we're a sort of small piece of the construction pie, so to speak, and we need to get as many people on board as we can, really. So I think the more we can all help each other and share what we've learned, and I think really particularly with smaller practices who might not have the resources and time, and some of this also comes down to cost as well. How can we help them achieve this as well, which I think is really important.
Yeah. So there was some more questions.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I had a question. So I'm wondering, just sort of segueing from the sharing of information, which I think is crucial. we, as designers and architects and interior designers and affiliates, this is at the forefront of our mind quite naturally. And we feel quite a big responsibility, most of us. And to circulate that information amongst us is obviously very valuable. But I think, and it goes back, I guess my question is more about client education. And I was really interested in some of the things that some of you've been doing where you actually do a retrospective with your projects and look at the embodied energy of the project and how successful it's been. And whether that's something that you actually share back with your clients, and then perhaps even taking that a step further and being a bit more, more transparent and celebrating perhaps one of the ones that are not perfect, but, doing better than what you have been doing previously, and sharing that and celebrating that client, and that might somehow filter through and that sense of responsibility, and sense of if this person is doing it and it's been successful on different levels, commercial as well as sustainable, maybe I can do it on my project, and when I've done my retrospective it hasn't been as good as that person's. Which I'm just wondering, does anyone do that? Does anyone share with their clients?
Oh, we haven't done it yet. Our case studies are kind of in their infancy. At the moment, they're asking more questions than giving answers. Our hypotheses are all a bit out at the moment. They've thrown some curveballs at us. But we've actually proposed a workshop with some consultant teams, some engineers from Arup to come in and help us resolve some of the complex issues that we're sort of coming up with. We're getting a bit bogged down in the detail, to be honest. So the purpose of them is not to be engineers, and it's to actually help inform other designs. But what we're realizing by just retrospectively looking at our projects is that we're learning a lot more, and we've got more questions now, and finding new ways that these will be helpful for us. Too early to tell you what they all are at the moment, sorry. But yeah, that's been a really fascinating task and really valuable. And we do believe that we can use them as marketing tools in the future, potentially with clients, for sure. And really they were born from a really amazing client we had, where we had to do that task for them. And we learnt from that. We've then gone away and realized how can we share this knowledge amongst the office as well? We can apply it to other projects and learn from that as well. So it is, as James said, it's all about learning from your past projects and trying to really gain more from them and keep searching for answers to questions you don't probably have yet, but it's all a fascinating task and all a learning experience. Do you want to add to that?
Sorry, there was another question up there.
Hi, Jasmine here from Spire. I'm interested in fees. How do you build in your design thinking, your analytical thinking, your monitoring in your fees? Or is it a matter of you just don't accept that project or working with that client because they don't share your values?
That was a very good question.
Great question. I think there's a bit of, I'm going to give you a nuanced answer. Yes, I'd say if it's completely obvious that you haven't got the client anywhere near where you want them to be, then don't accept the job. But I think also you can use it as a chance to educate and push them along as well. So it's pretty rare that you sort of meet a client that's so intolerable that you won't want to work for them, but they're out there without a doubt. You usually don't find out until much later, though. That's the problem. But I think in terms of fees, I think a lot of it is just built in, because I think we should be thinking about it as being fundamental to the design process. It's just another part of it. Now, I don't include necessarily doing calculations to work out the embodied energy of the building. And I was very interested to see what these guys have been doing. I think it's great. And we've been thinking about doing the same sort of thing again, because we all have BIM, and you can start associating those metrics with the materials. There's more work involved in that. So I would have thought the end point of that would be that as architects, we offer that as a service that we charge for, rather than just give something else away for free, which is what we've been doing for decades now, it seems. Every time we get a new piece of technology, we seem to just, it makes us more efficient, we just lower our fees. So I think instead what we should be doing is charging for it. So things like that, if we're actually improving, providing another service, a better service, I think we should actually be charging for it. Is the answer, the other side of that, the answer for me.
I can talk a little bit to that. I'm not involved with setting our fees at all, but the question about how we tackle the architect declare principle of measuring, doing life cycle analysis in our projects is something that came up in the process of doing our SAP, and it's a tricky one because we're not traditionally involved in measuring carbon in our buildings, but it's something that we really do need to start to understand better, to understand the impact of our buildings. And if you use the parallel of the analogy of a car manufacturer intimately understands the performance of a car and what's involved in it and how heavy it is and things like that. We're traditionally not very good at sort of understanding that and comparing our buildings. Each building is unique, so it's a different sort of scenario, but the more we can start to understand that, and there are some good in-house tools that you can use if you use BIM, which we're starting to use as well. But there's a delicate balance with not taking responsibility for reporting that, I suppose, because we're not experts. So we probably shouldn't be going to the client and offering that service unless we really upskill, to use your term. So it's about engaging the right consultants to provide that service, and getting the scope of everyone's fees aligned.
Can I maybe just make one comment regarding fees? We tried that once to separate us out in our fee proposals, and and we failed utterly. So so basically we had, life cycle assessment is another $3,500 or whatever, and then getting the energy rating from 7 stars to 8.5 is that, and up to 9 is this, etc. So we did that, and then the clients didn't take it up because obviously they could identify how much money they saved. And one client said, we can buy a bigger fridge if you don't do the life cycle assessment. So it was a double failure. But what James was saying is also, but I think what we need to understand is, I think this should be part of our core services, and we put, if we can, put that into our services, but we don't itemize it. We just got to make that work within the practice. And it is similar to any other sort of condition that you deal with in your architectural practice. It's your software package, it's your office fit out, it's your rent, it's your staff cost, and sustainability is part of your operational sort of requirements, so or cost. Just one question from the from far away. One question from Zoom. Is there a requirement or expectation for firms to sign up to Architects Declare and develop a sustainability action plan? Do you feel there's any resistance to this? I guess I can probably answer the question. There's no requirement. I think we should all encourage each other to have one. It's not it may become part of our sort of competency standards for architects at some point, but it's not yet. If it is in the future, it'd be great. It's not yet, but I guess maybe if I can continue on, my question is also actually to the panel. Who drives the sustainability action plan within the practice? How did that sort of all come about? Is it individuals against the directors?
Yes. No, it's definitely not. we've got a green team, and that was formed by people that were passionate about it and volunteered for it. And without them, it doesn't go anywhere, because the directors, you know, can have all these good ideas and want to implement sustainability, but they've got other things going on. And so you kind of need to share that role and that responsibility with the rest of your team. And as you said in our presentation, we do a lot of the research and the upskilling, and we teach the rest of our staff, but we're not necessarily the ones that are responsible for all of the outcomes, because it's a shared role. And I think that's something that's really great for a small 24-person firm. It works really well for us. And I think that to the previous question, no, having an SAP isn't a requirement, but it really helps you form your identity. Like breaking down the Architects Declare values and their key points on their website really helped us understand, why do we want to do this? Why does our firm in particular want to be sustainable, or beyond that? Why do they want to go regenerative? And how can we achieve that? And I guess without having those conversations, it's really hard to even get started.
I think at BKK it's a little bit, excuse me, similar to yourselves and JWA, in that we've got a group of people. We have one of the principals that sits at the top, and they might not necessarily come to every single meeting, but they're aware of what's going on. And then we have senior staff that drive that, and then other staff that are passionate about it to help us get things done. I think sort of similar to what you're saying, it's for us, we've gone through a process of analysing ourselves as a firm and looking at where we want to be in the next 20 years. And sustainability was one of our values. And similar to things that James was saying, you know, we've had all these disparate things that we've been doing within the practice around sustainability. But I think for us, that having an SOP is a really good opportunity to bring that together in a framework that actually helps pull all that together and give us a direction of where we're going, and actually put some meaningful targets down.
And I think it's like you've both said tonight, it's really important to have the support and buy-in from the leadership of the practice, because there is costs involved. There's people's time and courses and professional development, etc. So what we have done is set up our working groups for multiple areas, and sustainability is one of them. And we have our objectives and goals for 12 months or 5 years. And then we put a cost against that in a program, and that gets sent to board. I think that was similar to maybe you guys, or to management for sign off. So then they don't have to be involved anymore. There's no more roadblocks. So the team can just get on with the job ahead. And if that principal who's overseeing those groups wants to join, that's great. But if they're busy, it doesn't stop the work progressing. So yeah.
Yeah, ECOX, we have a similar organisation. We have a group called ECOX with members in each branch around the country. We kind of took it upon ourselves to do the sustainability action plan. It actually evolved into a sustainability strategy rather than a sustainability action plan. It became a bit more holistic and all-encompassing of trying to capture all the different elements of sustainability, including you know, social sustainability and these other aspects. It sort of came from within. We kind of got started on it and then sought approval and blessings from the director team. But it's, in a way, we kind of used the fact that somebody in the practice had signed up to Architects Declare, and it gave us really good leverage to say that we need to now produce this sustainability action plan to meet our obligations. We've signed up for Architects Declare. We've made this declaration, this commitment. It is meaningful. We are accountable. We weren't sure, to be honest, last year whether everybody was actually, we were under the impression that everybody needed to produce one by the end of 2021. So we sort of we put the foot down, accelerator on, and rushed to get something done by the end of last year. It's still going through some sort of final approvals processes, and it's essentially finished. Now they're having to rebuild the website to have somewhere to put it. But it's there and it's ready, and it's really enabled a lot of things, got a lot of balls rolling in the practice. So it's been really valuable for us.
Okay, one more question from the audience. One more, and while Verity is walking up there, there's one from far, far away again. Question from Nicola: any advice on how to bring on board those smaller companies that don't put the environment as a priority? Hard to say. I guess, maybe just my opinion is, don't blame and shame anybody. I think people are coming on board, and I think advocate for what you're passionate about, and always lead by example, and be inclusive. That'd be my opinion, but
they'll catch up basically because, oh, sorry, Izzy, yeah, everyone's going in this direction anyway, right?
Yeah, it kind of is going to happen.
Yeah.
I also might touch on sort of the way that we communicate the green movement a little bit. Sometimes a lot of the language is really intimidating, and I think that we could all benefit if there was more knowledge sharing around what we're doing. I know how intimidating it is to come to a talk and you hear someone talking about this embodied carbon versus that, and you're just like, how did you get that? How did that come out of your building? And I think it's really funny that it's like assumed knowledge, and it's totally not. It really is learned. So there is probably a bit of a language, terminology and communication improvement that like we could do as an industry to bring other people along with us. But yeah, I think that ultimately comes down to sharing resources at the end of the day.
And that's probably great why you guys have a glossary in your SAP.
We identified that pretty early on.
Yeah, even just last week was going through an exercise of trying to come up with a way to look at embodied carbon of a curtain wall or a solid cladded wall. No one else needs to do it. If it's done once, it's like you get so far in the weeds and you're so buried in information. Every firm does not need to do this. Yeah. There needs to be a way to share that. So I think transparency and cooperation is key. It's not a huge market here. Like there's a finite number of us. We all don't need to solve the same problem. Like there's just, there is some low hanging fruit that I think goes to that small practice. Like where our practice has invested in it. Our commitment is a lot less than a smaller practice. We're happy to share that. But like, we want to be part of that. It is part of the solution. We don't need to own that. It's not something we need to keep contained and to ourselves, really. Yeah, it should be out there. No one else needs to get in the weeds that deep. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, to be honest, I mean, this is something that we're working on within Architects Declare. Obviously, we want to sort of develop a knowledge sharing platform that makes it much easier. Obviously, yes, just to share knowledge and experience. Yes.
Is this working? Yeah. I'm Lawrence from Woods Bagot. I'm an interior designer, so obviously a lot of my job consists of picking materials and selecting materials. So it's funny because my question is about sharing knowledge between practices, and it would be great if everybody who has a database of good materials that we could use, because I hear a lot of people doing that within their own practices, and I'm thinking this is a lot of like work that could be just like that could be wasted by someone else who's doing the same research in another practice. And I understand there's like intellectual property matters with that aspect of the sharing information, but in the end, we're all working in the same direction and towards the same goal. So why not share this information? And I'm wondering if Architects Declare could, create such database, basically. And if the firms, small or big, would be willing to share this information with others.
That's deep. Yeah, I think probably in the future that should be the solution. At the moment, there are lots of databases available, like Declare or the Red List, or a couple of things that show you what you should be avoiding in your specification, which is really helpful. But until we have this conversation further between intellectual property and sharing all of our knowledge, yeah, do we know what that looks like? Probably not.
I think there's definitely a place for some sort of shared database of materials. Is a really great example of the way we can share information. The components and the aspects of the particular material are, there's no intellectual property in that. It's really about gathering information and organising it in a way that you can sort out and search and share. We've been scratching our heads for the best part of a year. It's one of the first things we started looking at is materials when we really started to get our group organised. And we've had a couple of little runs at it. It's such a monumental task for a practice of Cox's size. I think for a smaller practice, just as residential, it's, I'm not sure, a house maybe has a palette of 30 products and materials plus fixtures on a $100, $200 billion project. The amount of materials that goes into that. So if you're trying to look at excluding your red list materials on a project that size.
Sorry, David.
Are we offline? I'll take.
Sorry, let's speak to that music.
I think one of the things that I'm with on a really similar path. I think materials are such a low-hanging fruit, but there's a lot of work to sort of consolidate all of that, and we've started that process and also found it pretty overwhelming. One of the best ones that I've just started doing a bit of research into is Footprint. They have a database of 3,000 materials. It is paid, so you'd have to pay for a subscription fee. And that's something we're just going to investigate amongst others to see what is there within what's already out there. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And it's JDBA can testify there's a lot of man hours in that, trying to do that research. So I guess the first port of call in terms of before we can get that, I guess, consolidated dream database that we'd all love is maybe just try and see what's out there, because there are people that have done a lot of work already. But I think this just comes down to, I guess, the overriding theme of we've got to share that knowledge about even where to look, I think, in the first instance, because sometimes it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So, yep.
Yeah, so, and obviously that all needs to be formalized and administered, etc. So, and this is where I can sort of basically wrap that up. So I'm going to write to the Australian Taxation Office saying we'll be a not-for-profit organization, and then we can attract funding, and then we can actually also allocate resources. And there'll be issues of copyright and IP and liability, etc. So, but I think becoming a legal entity, then that'll actually help architects declare to facilitate that. So to wrap that up, first things first, the client's open, is it? Sorry. Oh no, that's the Sustainability Action Plan. Sorry. Yeah. So if you click onto that, then that's the
QR code.
The QR code. I know it's a QR code, but what is it for? You sound like my daughter.
You want my help or not?
You still sound like my daughter.
All right, so what we've done with the QR code is set up an opportunity for people who might be interested in joining RAP working group with similar practices geographically to themselves. So I guess it's a little bit similar to what Missy was talking about. If you'd like to get with like-minded practices and either progress, start a SAP from beginning, or get together to talk about where yours is at, please go to the QR code and put your details in, and we'll be in contact.
Yeah, and Uzma put up, you put up signs on the way out where you can also basically take a picture of the QR code and achieve exactly the same. Yes.
And the other QR code on the door is also so you can download the template for the SAP if you want to get started for your own practice. So we've got that Word file that Stefan was talking about earlier in the evening there.
Yeah, and it'll also be on the Architects Declare website. So in the next few days, is that correct? Yeah.
I will follow up with an email.
So, well, the Clyde thing is happening, is it? So
Clyde is happening, yes.
So basically, there's a tab at the Clyde, at the bar at the Clyde.
Yeah, there's a tab at the Clyde.
So if anybody is thirsty, feel free to to go to the Clyde. So yeah, I just want to thank all the presenters and the panel. Just amazing presentations, really good discussion, and thanks for all your effort and enthusiasm and the support for everybody. It's incredible. Thank you.